Hello. Okay. The only reason I'm using the microphone is that we are live casting this over to Kendall. Otherwise, y'all know me, I'm loud enough to be heard in this room. Okay, so hi, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Carolyn Margolin. I'm the director of STEM Aisle and STEM Engine. In the back of the room, we have Regine and Emma from STEM Aisle. We have Christine from Engine. We have Teresa from Space and Jovan from Space. Yay! And to my right, your left, we have the wonderful and fabulous Dr. Ildiko Barsoni. She will be one of our presenters today. And to my left, your right, we have Dr. Jesse Polito from the chemistry department. He will be your co-presenter. They're going to teach you everything you need to know about ever writing a science paper ever, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Close enough.
Close enough.
They're going to try. But please keep in mind, these are the facts. This is the knowledge you need in order to complete your final paper for your internship. So pay attention, take notes, learn a lot. I'm going to put down the mic and go to the back of the room now. Bye.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Margolin. Similar to Dr. Margolin, I'm loud enough normally. So this is a little weird, but we're going to make it happen. And hello, Kendall Campus. So I don't remember if Dr. Margolin mentioned that I'm not from the chemistry department or biology or any STEM field, but rather I'm from the English department. And I'm not a humanities major. I'm a social scientist. I came through education and I wrote my dissertation in APA style. Everybody knows what that is? APA style. Okay, so that's all that's relevant that you need to know about me today. So what Dr. Polito and I will do is we'll give you some general tips, suggestions on how to write a good research paper. Sometimes we'll be fancy and we call it a manuscript. But just so you know that we're talking about the same thing, okay? And we'll try to be as specific as we can to what you're doing, but you know, understand that it's hard to be specific, number one, because of your various disciplines, and number two, because depending on what specific journal, where you're trying to publish what you're working on, the requirements might differ. So that's what Dr. Polito is gonna talk to you about. So I'm gonna start it off, then I hand it over to Dr. Polito, and then I come back with writing tips, okay? So that's the plan. Now, I wanna start with something that I got from my favorite book in the world, the Bedford Handbook. And I'm showing this to you because if you took composition classes at the North Campus, surely you have a copy of the Bedford Handbook on your bookshelf, right? No? Yes? Yes. Now, those of you at Kendall Campus, I'm talking about the Bedford Handbook. It has the science complex on the cover, but normally it's orange. That's the 10th edition. And that's a handy little book to have because it covers a lot of the rhetoric of writing research papers and also some basic grammar that you might need. So if you have it on your bookshelf, here's tip number 1 for today. Get it from your bookshelf, dust it off, and use it because it's going to be useful for you as you, particularly as you proofread and edit your paper. Okay? So in this handbook, I love how the authors put in one sentence the entire research process. You can all read it, right? Okay. So that's basically what it is. A college research assignment asks you to pose questions worth exploring, read widely in search of possible answers, interpret what you read, draw reasoned conclusions, and support those conclusions with evidence. So no matter what you write, and if you're writing for education like I have, or you're doing a study in your area of expertise, that's basically what it is. But if you take a closer look, each of those actions is quite involved. Would you say, Dr. Pulido, right? So sounds easy, we can put it all in one sentence, but each of those actions is quite involved. How do you know what questions are worth exploring? Especially when you start off at the beginning of your career, you have a lot of things you're interested in, but they may be too factual, or maybe questions that have actually been well explained and well answered. So how do you know? You talk to your professors, right? That's what we do. We help you, we guide you, find questions that are worth exploring. There are also some general guidelines that I'd like to hit on, but I'm not gonna dwell too much on that, because my understanding is that you all are working on an experiment already, right? So you have your research questions, but still I just want to impress upon you that you may have not come up with that research question on your own. Your professors might have told you what to do, but still that research question was step number 1 to an excellent research paper. Okay, your research question really determines, the quality of your research question really determines what kind of research paper you come up with at the end. So, according to my lovely handbook here that you already have, those are the 3 essential elements of a research question. Now, at this point, what I'd like for you to do is look at the handout that you get and start filling out the gaps. I see some of you are already doing it, right? So I wanted to make this presentation interactive because it's writing after all, and I know that you're probably all very excited about writing, right? I just wanted to make sure that you're also engaged with this very engaging presentation about writing. Okay, so what you need to do on that handout that you got, you start filling out the gaps with the information that I share with you and are on your slides, all right? So right about now, you should have some information there. So what are the characteristics of research questions? Good research questions, quality research questions are focused, challenging, and grounded. And again, I wanted you to have this because sooner or later you are going to be the researcher coming up with the research question, right? So I wanted to have that reference because I can't emphasize enough. The quality of your research paper depends on the quality of your research question. So focused, challenging, and grounded. So that's number 1. And in the end, when you do get to pick your own research study, make sure you have an interest in it, right? Because nothing is interesting if you're not interested in it. So those are my most important tips, right? It's kind of hard to write well about something that you have no interest in it. Okay. The other thing is, here's the word of the day. The word of the day is consistency. So once you have a research topic and a research question, particularly the research question, you're going to make sure that your manuscript, right, that's the fancy word for research paper, that your research paper is consistent with that research question, right? Your title, for instance, needs to tell me what were your variables, possibly even what kind of statistical analyses you had. So sometimes those titles get to be a little longer because of that, because they're consistent with the research question. Because if I look at your title, I should be able to tell with pretty good precision what your research question might have been, okay? Your hypothesis, similarly, and your methods, they all need to go back to the research questions because in the end, what are you trying to do with your study? You're trying to answer the research question, right? Okay, so here's the agenda for my part of the presentation. We're gonna review the general elements, what normally studies contain. Then before I get to the writing tips, Professor Pulido will talk to you a little bit in more detail about some of the journals that you might consider submitting your paper to. Okay, so let's take a look at those elements. Just a few, right? Not too many. I'm going to guess that all of you here and all of you sitting in the room at Kendall have already done some reading, right? You've looked at some studies before. So in those studies, you may remember you saw subtitles just such as abstract, right? They all had titles, obviously. You had subtitles such as abstract. Introduction, you may or may not have, because, for instance, APA style actually does not want us to write the word introduction, because APA is really good with don't state the obvious. When you start your paper, that's the introduction. So if you're reading a paper that was written in APA style, then you won't have the subtitle introduction, but regardless, the part is there. That's the introductory part, right? In preparation for this presentation, believe it or not, I actually did pull some chemistry and biology articles. It was a lot of fun for me to do that. I did attempt to read them as well. And some of them actually did not have the title introduction either. But again, that would be stating the obvious. Some styles will, and some journals will want you to do that. Other journals not. It depends on the particulars of the journal. But in any event, all studies will include a literature review. And why is that? It's because no study, no problem, no research question occurs in a vacuum. It happened because, or you have the question because it's a gap in the literature, nobody addressed it before, or you're trying to, maybe there was a study, but you're trying to replicate that study, right? So you're going to include a literature review in your paper. Now, some of the scientific papers that I saw, actually, in fact, most of them did not have a subtitle that was called literature review, but they did include literature review in the introduction, right? Again, that's a journal requirement. When you are ready to submit your paper to a journal, you see what the requirements are. All scientific papers will have a methodology section, okay? They will all have a results section, a discussion section. You may have a conclusion section, and you have a bibliography. You may or may not have an appendix, or appendices if you have more than one, because everybody knows here that appendices is the plural of appendix, right? Okay. Okay, so the last sentence over there is pretty important. I'm going to get the laser pointer here and point to the screen that you actually see, right? The naming convention, so sometimes you won't actually see methodology, you'll see methods, right? Or you might see results and or actually no, you won't do that. You will see discussion and conclusion, right? All right, so briefly, a little bit about each of these sections. Your article needs to have a title, obviously, right? Now, the title, very importantly, it needs to be straightforward. You need to be very clear about what you did, what you have in this article, and it needs to be consistent with the research question. I cannot emphasize enough, the word of the day is consistency. Why is that important? You want to, ideally, you want to have your variables reflected in your title, possibly even your statistical analysis. And that is because when your article gets published, and if you want other people to find your article, then the search engines will pull information primarily based on your title and the keywords that you provide, okay? So if the more specific your title to the study that you're doing, the more likely it is that people will find your article, right? And how do you do a good title? You try to convey in the format of the title the answer to your research question. Okay. So I selected 2 titles there. Do not expect me to read them because they're all sciencey. But that is one. I can try. The role of kinetics versus thermodynamics in surface-assisted Ullmann coupling on gold and silver surfaces. Did I do well? Okay, good. A so far. Okay, do we see the variables? Yes? What are the researchers looking at? So they're looking at kinetics versus thermodynamics. Where? There. Now, I cannot explain to you what that means, right? Because that's not my major. It's your major, it's your background. But what I can see, even without the science background, is the variables and what the researchers are clearly looking at. Here's another one. That's another title. Do we know exactly what the authors are doing? Titles need to be clear and straightforward. Okay, so moving on to the abstract. I have there the abstract of the first article that you see. You saw 2 titles. The first article's abstract is what you see on the screen now. In your abstract, and this I know this is probably one of the biggest headaches when you write and you get ready to publish, is to write an abstract that conveys all crucial information and is within the word count that the journal allows you. So try this. When you write your abstract, try to shoot for about 200 words. That is about a page if you're double spacing. Now this particular abstract was 249 words. So sometimes, depending on the journal, they may allow abstracts that are a little bit longer. But 200 is a good one to start with. What do you need to have in there? In your research article, so you're going to write the abstract last, right? You start writing the abstract when you're almost done with your article, right? And in your article, you're going to have a section for what was the purpose, what was the general background of your, why are you doing this study, right? You're going to have a section on your methods, your findings, and what are the implications or what is the significance? Why is this study significant, right? All of that will be included in your paper. All you need to do is condense those sections into an abstract, right? So the example that we're not gonna go ahead and read that. It's only up there so we can see the color coding, right? Purpose, right? What were the findings? What were the methods? What did they do? And what are the implications? And that fits within. And where's Dr. Margaret? I want to give her a shout out because she helped me a little with that. Okay. So that is another example of an abstract from another article. Now this is interesting because this is the abstract. And see what they did? That's pretty nice. That makes it easier on the eye. Now your journal, the journal you're submitting to may or may not allow that. But if they do, that's really nice for the reader because it makes it clear. But look at the section. Background objectives, what was the purpose, right? Why are we doing this? What methods did we use? What were the results? And what are the conclusions, what implications, right? So those are the sections you need to have in your abstract, because we need to know, as readers, we need to know, why did you do the study? What did you do? And what were the major findings? So in that findings section, the conclusion section, right? The major findings in your abstract, that needs to answer the research question, right? That has to give me the major answer, the most important answer to the research question. You may have some sub-findings, or some unexpected findings, things like that in your article. But your abstract needs to answer the research question. I need to know what the answer was. And if you didn't find the answer, or you found something not expected, then it needs to say that. Okay? Okay, so here are the other sections. What do we put in the introduction? In the introductions, as your reader, I want to see, what did you do? What was the problem that you were looking at, and why? So the problem, what was the problem, and what is the purpose of doing this? Like I mentioned before, this section, especially in the natural sciences, sometimes includes the literature review as well, because that gives us a good background of where the problem is coming from, what other people looked at, where's the gap in the literature that your study is trying to fill, or whose study you're trying to replicate. Replicability is an important concept that I'm going to talk about a little bit. And I also mentioned that last bullet point, that sometimes you don't say introduction. But so basically the what and the why. What am I doing and why I'm doing this. Okay, the next section is your literature review. That is obviously the studies that have been done before. This is the section that is usually very heavy with in-text citations, right? Now, depending on the style that you're writing in, I notice most of the styles in natural sciences are very similar to what I'm more familiar with, APA, in that they use author's last name and year. I'm looking at Professor Purita and he's nodding to confirm. Some styles, like the American Medical Association style, if you're writing for a journal that uses AMA style, then your in-text citations are gonna be done with superscript. So those little numbers on top after your sentence, and then those numbers refer to the entries on your bibliography. I know AMA style does that, but most other styles do author's last name and year in parentheses inside the body of your paper. Okay, so in the literature review, you want to highlight several things. You want to talk about your variables. Who studied the variables you're studying before? What did they find? Who studied the problem you're studying before? What did they find? So you often have subheadings inside that section. So whether it's within the introduction or there's a separate literature review section. As you're reviewing the literature, you might find it useful to have some subheadings, and those subheadings are grouped by variables often. And so you want to explain what is the gap. Does everybody understand what gap in the literature means? I said it like 3 times already, but I don't know if you know what that means. Gap in the literature means that other scientists work on other experiments, they publish their studies, but there's one area that haven't quite been studied yet, right? Or you found very little, maybe only just a few studies in that area. That is a gap. That's the gap that your study will fill, because your study now will focus on that area that nobody else or very few people have studied before, okay? That's what it means. There's a gap in the literature. Okay, so in your methodology section, usually this section takes up a good chunk, a significant part of your paper, because in here you need to explain exactly what you did in your experiment. And the second bullet point there is crucial. Your readers should be able to replicate your study based on your descriptions. So think about somebody else, another person, and when you explain what you did step by step, you need to think about, will this person be able to replicate what I did, do exactly what I did, and come to the same conclusions? If they would get really different conclusions, then there was something wrong with your description, possibly, right? So you're going to talk about your sample size, the procedures, how did you get your sample, how did you collect your sample, data collection, how did you analyze your sample? So what was the statistical procedure? I'm going to go back there because I forgot to say something really important. Your methodology is consistent with your research question, right? The statistical procedure we choose, well, you choose with the help of your professors, is the best statistical procedure to answer the particular question that you had, right? So it's not what you feel comfortable with. It's dictated by your research question. Okay. Now what are we going to talk about in the results section? Every study has a results section. Obviously, we're going to talk about the results. What did you get? What were the numbers after you ran the statistical analysis? You may do several statistical procedures, right? So you're going to describe, so maybe you do some descriptives, maybe you do some logistical regression, maybe you do some ANOVA, I don't know, whatever the statistical procedure is. Usually you do more than one, right? Descriptives is different from logistical regression, because with logistical regression, multiple regression, with ANOVA, you're making inferences. With descriptive statistics, you're just describing your sample, right? So you usually have, I would say, usually have at least 2 different statistical procedures, right? So per statistical procedure, you're going to describe your findings. How will you do it? You will do it in words, as if you were saying it, right? And you will also display the tables and the graphs, whatever it is that you have in the study. The next bullet point there is super important. What you don't include in the results section is, so what does this mean? You simply describe the numbers, what you get, even if you find something that you did not expect. You're not allowed to lie or omit, right? Even if your results are contrary to what you were expecting, you have to report them. but no interpretation. Your interpretation of the data, so what does this mean, goes into the next section, which is the discussion section. Okay, so that's very important. Keep that separate. Results is just the pure data, and discussion is the interpretation of the data. In this section, so it depends on the journal, or sometimes you have the freedom. In this section, you also talk about the significance of your findings, or maybe you leave that to the conclusion. Sometimes the journal will dictate that, and other times it's up to you. In this section also you talk about the limitations of the study. Do we know what that means? Limitations are things that you admit that you were restricted with, that you were limited to, right? Maybe you say, my sample size was small because, or something that you couldn't do. You couldn't include, you wanted to include, but you couldn't include in the study, right? So limitations are those that, conditions that made your study less than ideal. I didn't put it there, but just so you know, limitations are different from delimitations, right? So maybe you, in this section, you want to also describe the delimitations of the study. Delimitations are similar because they will say, I didn't include certain things, but those are things that, delimitations are things that were in your control. You decided not to include something. Okay? So if you have something like that, you would include them here as well. So limitations and delimitations, two different things. Similar but different. Limitations are out of your control. Delimitations are in your control. And then either in this section or the next one, in conclusions, you also want to make recommendations. Comes standard in every research paper, recommendations for future research. What should be done next after this study? Okay? So the last few pieces, conclusions. So if you have a separate conclusion sections, you want to summarize like a conclusion, right? Remember when you wrote a 5-paragraph essay for your composition class, you had a conclusion? You restated your thesis and you included your most important details. That's not different. And so there's going to be a bibliography section at the end. That's very important. Sometimes it's called bibliography. Most often it's called references. In these natural science papers that I saw, often I saw literature cited, but what it is more important than what it's called, right? What it is the list of full citations, right? Usually listed by the author's last names. And what goes in the appendix? If you have only one, it's an appendix. If you have more than one, then you're going to title it appendices. Not appendicitis, right? Appendices. Okay, so it's extra information that's not awfully important for me to have. But for instance, if you did a survey, I'm sorry, my example is social sciencey, but if I administered a survey to people, then I'll put the actual survey there in the appendix. Things that are good to have if somebody else wants to replicate your study, and then they will need that. But otherwise, just to learn about your findings, I don't necessarily have to see it. Okay, what comes next here? Wait, should I go back? Okay, so that concludes the manuscript elements section. So I'm going to hand it over to Professor Pulido so he can talk to you more specifically about the journals and scientific writing, and then I come back with general writing tips. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. So my presentation will be a little different. Some of you already know me, some of you don't. I'm Dr. Jesse Pulido. I'm chemistry department here at North Campus. I'm a hardcore chemist. So what you're looking to do, I've done, right? And I was in your seat, quite a while ago. But around the time that I was 19, I started doing my research. So you want something on how to write a research paper, right? You want to know some of the guidelines, what you're supposed to do. Dr. Barsoni, she did an actually really great job because she broke down every piece for you. I'm going to show you some of the resources that you guys might not know is available. So here's a little quote, and I'm not entirely sure who came up with it. I was trying to look it up and I couldn't quite find it. Somebody wrote a book on this literally this year, so that kind of complicated things. Begin with the end in mind. Meaning what? What does that mean to you? Like, what is your finished product going to look like? You guys want to write a research paper, don't you? Right, so what are some guidelines for writing a research paper? Have you ever looked for guidelines of writing a research paper? Well, here's one for you. All right, what do you guys see? Research paper. And what's the title of it? How to write a research paper. Right. That's a useful kind of tool. You guys have to kind of start coming out of your shell. You have to start looking for things, right? Dr. Barsoni is not wrong. Your research advisor is going to be your biggest tool, your biggest resource. But this will ultimately come from you. It'll be whatever you really decide to make it into. Now, on that slide, I don't know if you guys can see it too well. I've got one or two things highlighted, really two things highlighted, and I want you to pay attention to three things to learn from this. Right? First of all, I don't use a writing tool except the little highlighter, and I can't draw a straight line to save my life. Right? You'll notice that my highlighting is a little crooked. Right? But if you look at what I highlighted for you, it's going to be a substantial effort. Right? This is not I get up in the morning and I decide I'm going to write a manuscript and I'm going to publish it by the end of the day. Right? There's only a few of us that could do that. I'm not one of them. When I say us, I mean professors in general. I actually know of professors who will get up in the morning, write something, and they will submit it. And then by late afternoon, they get an answer saying, yes, but please polish it because it's terribly written. Right? You guys are going to put an effort. It's a process. Right? You're going to write one version, give it to your advisor. They're going to check it over. They might have some commentary, and your paper will be returned to you bleeding red, right, from corrections, and you will have to take another shot at it. And they'll continue that process over and over. The other thing I want you to realize from the slide, right, aside from my sloppy highlighting, right, the fact that it's going to be an effort is there's lots of practical suggestions that you guys can find. Right? You have resources online, and you should start making habit of finding them and kind of delving through and kind of diving through what is going to be useful and what is not. Right? So has anyone ever heard of the International Journal of Sports Physical Therapy? Me neither. Right? But I found it, right? Just because I was thinking of you and standing here in front of you. So be open-minded, right? Find some guidelines. A lot of you have seen something like this before. What is that? Oh, everybody knows what a poster is. Do you realize that your posters, as you make them, are eventually or have the potential to become a research article? Right? And Dr. Barsoni went through all the parts. Tell me, do you see the parts up there? Do you see an abstract, the methods, right? Even kind of into little sections. A results, right? A discussion and a conclusion. They even have acknowledgments and probably something like references, because you have to cite other works that kind of propelled your idea, your research. Right? This was borrowed from Dr. Alfredo Leon, right? So this is homegrown. Right? And this is the point where I show you another one, which is not homegrown. Sorry. There we go. Not homegrown, not Miami-Dade. Is it different? Where's the methods? Like down there? Does that look like a very descriptive method for you? This is not a bad poster. This is my way of saying know your audience. Right? There are different criteria for publishing in different places, and it's very liberal when you're doing a poster. You have more freedom to kind of develop what you're trying to do. Right? Doesn't it look nice, kind of well put together? Slightly, right? It would probably be good if they had this kind of template. Right? If you've written a poster here, if you've worked with some of the faculty, especially at North, you will know we have this template when you're working on a poster. Right? And it has a description of what goes in every section, and you kind of need to adhere to that. We're not really here to talk about posters. I just wanted to show you because there's different disciplines, different crowds, and there's usually a template or a guideline. Here's another poster, the last one, promise. Right? What's that? That's me. Right? That's my poster from not too far along when I was around your age, right? A little bit further along. And you'll see, it's kind of not as nice because it doesn't kind of transfer over into the PowerPoint that I put it. I lost some of the bullet points. I actually had to rework some of the figures, so don't be too critical. I'm just showing you this for one very important reason. What's that? That is the research article that my poster eventually turned into, right? Journal of Medicinal Chemistry. I'm a chemist, right? I'm going to focus a little more on the chemistry. I know some of your biotechnology. I know my crowd, right? But understand, I'm a chemist. So this was one of my first publications. And if you look at it, it's almost exactly the same. You don't have to understand everything that I'm talking about. I'll read the title for you. Synthesis and Cytostatic Evaluation of 4N-alkanoyl and 4N-alkyl gemcitabine analogs. Right? I took a really popular anti-cancer drug, I modified it at the position 4N, and I just saw how it worked, right, in tumor cells. We're not going to go into the details of it. That's just what I did. And you can kind of see that from the title, and if you ever kind of take a look into what you need to do to submit a research article, you'll see that there are guidelines waiting for you. Can I have a little assistance with the clicking in the back? Hi. So my presentations tend to be more dynamic. I usually have my computer. I'm in control of this. I have hyperlinks for you. If you go to ACS website, if you go to the Journal of Medicinal Chemistry, because you found an article that you really liked, right, and it kind of coincided with what you were doing or what you were looking into, you should probably click right around there where it says Submission and Review and go down to Author Guidelines. Go ahead, click it. And then you'll see this long list of, guess what? Guidelines for you. Right. I'm going to make the search a little easier for you. Can you press a Control Find and look for the word organization? Because that's part of what you guys are worried about, how to organize your manuscript, right? How to organize your paper. Just Control F, organization, if it lets you. If it's not working for you, I might go back there myself really fast and do that. You guys should all be able to hear me while I'm on the mic. No luck? Bear with me. Dr. Barsoni had everything on PowerPoint. I'm not crazy about PowerPoint all the time. I like to have it as a tool, but I like to go in and out of things. All right, next one. There should be 3. That's the first of, there we go. What do you guys see as right under, first point, right under manuscript organization? Oh, title, right? And then what? The title of the manuscript should reflect the purposes and findings of the work. That sounds exactly like what you were listening to a minute ago, right? And now you know if you want to publish in this specific journal, you need a title. And the title should kind of reflect the purpose of the work, right? Can you scroll down a little bit more? Oh, look, other points that you need to have. Every journal's different, right? And that's where I need to start making a kind of a point for you. You're going to publish your work somewhere. You're going to take your manuscript and submit it and you're going to become an author, you need to adhere to the guidelines of whatever journal you're trying to get into. Adhering to the guidelines does not guarantee that you're going to publish in that journal. But not adhering to the guidelines guarantees you're not going to publish in that journal. So you have to kind of stick to it. You have to see if your work is relevant to that journal. Does it fit? And if you ever scrolled up, and you don't really have to, you would see the kind of purpose of the journal. They usually give you insight as to whether your work should be in there. Right? You can kind of get out of that one if you want. Go back to the link, and to the web page, maybe. All right. Click on your submission because you are going to be an author, right around there. And look for information for authors. Because if you ever get stuck, that's what you're interested in. And if you scroll down, all the way down, keep going. Up, a little too high, sorry. Up, up. Information for authors, there it was. You'll see everything you need, including submission requirements. And this is just one journal, guys. This is one of the journals that I published. Right? And this, we'll get to towards the end, a checklist. You can go ahead and click it if they want to see it. You guys want to see the checklist? People tend to like checklists. Go ahead. Let it rip. Click it. Author submission checklist. Oh, it's open somewhere? Oh, open it. It's a document. Huh? All right. The point is, when you open this, you're going to see a checklist. There's going to be some introduction, a little background of the journal, and then there's going to be a box with literal small boxes for you to check off. Did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do your due diligence and kind of check off everything that you need? And the journals always make it very easy for you to kind of submit your article. The only thing you have to do is just go looking for it, right? And it's very nice, right? See, and they kind of keep it up to date, right? 2019. Does anybody have any questions so far? No? Okay, can we come back to the PowerPoint presentation? I'm going to really work him over today. Okay, so that's what you do when you find a relevant article. You have some direction. This is a paper that kind of spawned me to write another paper. What if you don't have that? What if you're just looking for a journal? How do you find a journal that you might want to try? Does anybody have an idea? So Google Scholar, type up a topic. How about just keeping it general? How about just trying to look for a list of scientific journals? I mean, you can find Google Scholar, you can find specific articles, but I'm talking about just finding the journal that you're interested in publishing, right? Look for a list of them. There's lots of databases. Wikipedia has one, Science Direct has another one. The American Chemical Society, the one the chemists use, has its own database. And there's even open access ones, right? I'm going to show you the open access ones in just a second. They look like that, right? Literally, you will find open access literature and journals, and I'm going to have to put you through it. Could you click that hyperlink on that arrow? There it is. And just scroll down a bit so they can see. You're going to literally see journals by subject, and we can pick any one of those. Right? Whatever field is of interest to you, whatever papers you come across, those are reference points for you to figure out where in the big world of science literature does your article fit. Right? And I know it can be a little overwhelming, like, oh my goodness, where do I start? Starts by just doing a search and trying to focus in on what interests you, right? Or what field are you in. So as you go through some of those, you'll notice that there's a lot, right? And some journals, I hate to say, they have a bit more of an impact factor, and that's exactly how we measure the importance of a journal, right? You have to understand your research is going to have a weight, an importance, and you need to kind of match it to where you're trying to submit. A lot of those, even like this one, medicinal chemistry, man, you found that, that's me, right? Go ahead, click that one for me. I'm just curious of what it looks like. And they'll tell you about the editorial board. Do you know what the editorial board means? Those are the editors that are going to say, for lack of better words, yay or nay. Yes, your paper belongs with us. Sorry, this is not the journal for you. Right? And they have other professors, because the journals should be peer-reviewed, that are going to give you feedback. I tend to call them referees because my mentor called them referees, and they will call foul when there's something that they don't like. Right? Please fix this. Your paper is great, but it needs to have more in this area. And again, that's part of the process. You submit something, and you get information about it, you get feedback, and you correct it or add. The last thing I'll show you there is that, which is on the very bottom, the impact factor. Again, the weight, the significance of the journal. Impact factors go a little bit higher than 1.8 and 1.9. Okay? 1.8, 1.9 is an okay journal. It's respectable, it's well published, right? It's got a 5-year impact factor, which is very nice. It's consistently good. That's kind of a measure of the significance of the work. How many people are citing it, how important the editors feel it is, right? Journals can be as low as 0.1, 0.2, and go as high as 20 or 30 impact factor. Right? So it's a good thing to keep in mind. Right? Your journal fits somewhere. Sorry, your article, your chapter is going to go somewhere. You just need to find where. Can we come back to the PowerPoint? We're not going to do that too many more times, so don't worry. Okay. So, my suggestion for you is always start with a broad search, right? ACS is for chemists, right? And ACS is not just for chemists, right? There's a lot of biology work there. There's a lot of physics, right? There's mathematics, right? Computational, right? But the Journal for the American Chemical Society is one of the big ones, right? For me, right? Broad search is what you want. Find a database. Right? Find something that you've been reading all along and just look at where it came from and start checking impact factor. Does your work fit into what you've been reading? Can it be published alongside of those things that you've been building on? Right? Those gaps that you're addressing, should they be next to each other with what you read? Okay, so one more time, and I'll be merciful. Right? I say go broad because this is what broad looks like. ACS, American Chemical Society Publishing, right, Center. They have tools to help you in case the writing isn't what it should be, right, but they're not always free. And if you scroll down just a little bit, stop right there, you can see where you can get the basics. You can select a journal. We're not going to select a journal. The journal is, you can get the guidelines right away if you know your journal. But if you just want general guidelines, how do I begin? Get the basics. Right? Go ahead. As you go into the basics and scroll down, guess what? Where is it? Little lower. Not the ethical guidelines, not yet. Right there, thank you. Author guidelines. Information for authors, because once you're an author for long enough, you will become an editor. And here's another long document with little hyperlinks for you to jump around with the guidelines that you need, including the checklist. Right? Go broad in your search. Find your journal. Right? Take into consideration not just the guidelines, the standards, and the criteria for making an honest report of your findings, right? The ethical standards, the ethical guidelines, always important to look at. Now, I have one more request. Right? Go back. Just one more time. I'm going to jump a little back. Find this hyperlink again, if you don't mind. You're awesome, by the way. Thank you. Okay, yep. Submission and review, just click on it, right there. Scroll down, or do a control find for the word template. Template. You will find it. Guess what I'm going to show you? I just said it, a template, right? Remember when I showed you guys the poster template? Guess what all the journals tend to do? They give you a template with all the sizing and the fonts and description of what goes into all of the sections. Right? So you can go into information for authors, scroll down just a little bit more. We should be able to find the templates right there. Right? And sometimes you got to jump a few hoops, sorry. Right? But it's honest. Right? This is how you get your paper submitted. A little bit lower, right there. It's a Word document, it's going to download, and I'm just going to show you guys the template, if that's all right. Is it coming up? If it gives you any grief whatsoever, I have it in that folder, remember. I came prepared. There's your template. Sorry, that's the cover letter for your template. The second page, if you want to really look at the second page, this is where your title goes. This is where your abstract goes. This is where your manuscript begins, right? Just a little bit lower. I think you might have changed the font, but that's all right. Right? See, there's where your text begins. And it says, for full instruction, please look here and go there for more instructions. And your manuscript could be something as large as 20, 30 pages. I've seen those. Or they could be as small as 2 pages, a small communication. This happens to be a 7-pager, or the template for a 7-page manuscript. Right? And again, don't panic. That's a normal thing. Right? You guys will discover when you're an English major or you're a professor, they say that the hardest thing you have to do is write about yourself. Yeah. Wait till you apply this to chemistry. This becomes a part of you. Right? You will find this difficult to write about because it is yours. Right? But it is your story. Right? And that's what I was always told. Say this like a story. Tell me how you get from where you started to that very end, which you should have been keeping in mind the whole time. Right? What you're going to conclude, what your data is. Every line, everything that you say should lead you in that direction. Right? So it will be difficult, it'll be a process. But if you've done a poster, you can do this. Right? So there's nothing to worry about. Can I have back the PowerPoint? And we're not going to do that to you anymore. But I appreciate it. Okay. So if you go broad, you should look for that checklist, which I showed you. And you should keep in mind the ethical guidelines. Point 1 and point 4 are the biggest ones. Right? And I'm just going to talk about them for a second because it's, as an author, your obligation to kind of present accurate and complete account of the research performed. If it doesn't look nice, I'm sorry. It's part of the data, it needs to be included. There's statistics that you can do to prove if something is an outlier, but you must give an accurate representation of what you've seen. And although points 2 and 3 are very important as well, number 4, you have to give credit where credit's due and do your due diligence. That means any work that came before you of significance that merits mention must be mentioned and must be cited correctly, either by APA or AMA. Right? It doesn't matter which style. Right? It depends on the journal, and when you look at the journal of interest, look for guidelines. So, without further ado, I think we're about due for a break. We have 5 minutes? All right. We have a little time. All right, you guys get, I think, a 5-minute break. You can thank me, it's fine. I hope you are aware of the beautiful building that we do have. That's North Campus Science Complex that you're currently sitting in.
5-minute break so you guys can stretch out.
Stretch, go to the restroom, unwind.
Okay, so we're going to continue with writing tips. Don't forget to fill in the gaps, not in the literature, but rather on your notes. So for this part, I was thinking about ways to make it as useful as possible, but it was a difficult job to do, because as I think it's abundantly clear, thank you, from what we both said, is the requirements are so, the requirements vary. I'm not going to say they're so different, but they vary by journal. But in the end, writing is writing, grammar is grammar, right? So some things stay constant. So let's see how I did. You tell me. I try to make it general, but specific enough to be useful. So let's see. So the first writing tip that I have for you is actually something that we both mentioned before, is be resourceful. We both said your number one most important resource is your professor who's guiding your study. Don't be afraid to ask questions, right? Because you are at liberty to be a student. You're starting out, so you need guidance, and we know that, okay? So your professor is your first resource. But in addition, I think from Dr. Pulido's presentation, you can see that you are also your own resource. Search for information. Particularly, I think that what you heard a few minutes ago regarding search for a journal, search for an open access journal, find a journal that, that publishes a lot of student work. That's your starting point. See what the requirements are there. So ask questions, do your due diligence. Turn this on and we go. Okay, so be resourceful. Know the requirements. I refer to my handy handbook, Bedford Handbook, 10th edition, right? So they call it assess the writing situation. I love that, assess the writing situation. What's your writing situation, right? Where do you want to publish your little article? That is your writing situation, assess it. So we went through all of that. Read and reread the requirements, the guidelines. That is your writing situation. Find them and read them. If you need help interpreting them as something that is not clear, you don't know what it is because it's a jargon that we use for, you know, technical language that is used for publishing scientific articles, then ask your professor. Or come into the writing center and ask a tutor, right? The other handout that you have in your hand is the information about the writing center. So the tutors there are pretty good at helping out students with interpreting requirements as well, as long as you have them, as long as you bring them in. Those of you at Kendall campus, you also have a writing center. It's in building 2, just like ours, and it's inside the library, okay? So make sure you do that. That's very important for another reason as well. I was just sharing with Dr. Pulido. I did a presentation this week that was similar to this one. It was for the humanities, how to write a research paper in the humanities. And I started up my presentation. I looked at those slides about 10 times, or 20, or maybe 100 before the presentation. So I pulled it up and I started skipping through the slides. The first thing I noticed was a typo right before the presentation. And it happens because you see your paper, you see, and after a while you don't really see it. You think you see what, you think you're reading what you were supposed to be there, but is not. So it's always good to bring it in. Now, a misconception. I talk to a lot of students who say, but the writing center isn't just like a bunch of English majors helping with composition papers only. And the answer is, I'm looking at Steve because he knows. He says yes. The answer is no, of course not. In the writing, you can bring in any writing center college-wide. You can bring in whatever it is that you're working on. So the tutor you're talking to may not be a content area expert, but is a writing expert, and also is an expert in reading and reading scholarly articles. So you know, if someone like me helps you, I may not know the content area, but I can I can tell a variable when I see one, right? And also definitely English is English, grammar is grammar, right? Logic is logic, right? So you can definitely seek help there. We were also talking about, so where do you find information? How do you find a journal? Most, definitely Google it, right? Professor Pulido mentioned some sites, even if, for this purpose, certainly Wikipedia, just to find where journals are. But guess who's an expert in information on campus? Guess who can help you find information? A librarian, right? Librarians are also known as information literacy experts. They can actually help you find information, right? So know your resources, be resourceful. My number one advice to you. And pace yourself. Dr. Pulido answered. We had a little meeting before this presentation. We met for about 10 minutes or so, right? I swear we didn't talk about these things, but he and I are sharing the same thing. You are not going to write a research paper overnight, right? It's a marathon, right? You write, you put it aside, you come back to it, you read more, you write and read and read and then write. It's going to take several days, and often when you send it to a journal, you'll get it back with suggestions to revise. Most of us do, no matter how many papers we write. And then we make the revisions, and then it gets published. It doesn't happen overnight. Tip number 2, and this is my favorite part of this presentation, be accurate. Be accurate. So we talked about being answering the research question. We have to do it clearly and concisely. As you begin to write, remember your writing must be clear and concise. APA actually says in the manual, the APA guide, they say only what needs to be said. And here's my other typo. Did you see that? I shouldn't be pointing out. That's the typo I found on the other presentation. And I didn't do it here. Now, so disregard the typo, it's B. The journal that Dr. Pulido referenced, the American Chemical Society, actually has its own publication manual. It's called the ACS Style Guide. And guess who looked it up? I did, to prepare for this presentation. And guess what they say? Well, you don't have to guess because it's right there. Scientific writing, in particular, must be precise and unambiguous to be effective. Think about those words there. Precise and unambiguous. Now, I went to another website that you can also Google. Duke University has a really nice website with resources for scientific writing. So you can write that down. So Dr. Sheffield there says this: the best scientists can communicate complicated results to intelligent readers outside their field. Long, complex writing doesn't imply good science. How about that? So you have to be able to explain your findings to reasonable, intelligent people outside the field. That's a really good way to think about writing in your field. Now you recognize him too. So I'm just gonna let that sink in for a second. So if Einstein says it, it must be true, right? You don't have to make your writing big and complex. It takes a genius to go in the other direction. Break it down in a way that makes sense to a reasonable, intelligent person. Okay, and so let's talk a little bit about accuracy in more grammatical terms. So that's my favorite part of the presentation. Now, I could stand here and talk to you for the next 2 hours about fragments and run-ons, right? But that's too obvious, right? Those kinds of errors you know about, your composition teachers told you about, and you should know not to do, right? I'm not gonna quiz you on fragments and run-ons. If fragments and run-ons sounds completely unfamiliar, then you will look up those in the Bedford Handbook. But I do want to talk to you about something like modifiers. Does anybody know what that means? Ever heard of modifiers? Never heard of modifiers? Okay, so just a quick tip here to make your writing clearer. So modifiers could be just like an adjective, right? When I say big room, room is a noun, and the adjective is what? Big, very good. So that adjective big modifies the room, right? So I can call an adjective a modifier too. So modifier is a word or a phrase that talks about another word, right? That describes another word. Okay. So we tend to make the mistake of not placing the modifiers where they belong, and where modifiers belong is next to the word that they modify. I'm going to say that again. Modifiers need to go next to the word that they modify. So look at, I refer to APA because APA is really good at breaking down some grammar rules. Others are not that grammarish. But so look at this first sentence up here. The investigator tested the participants using this procedure. Who was using the procedure? Huh? Well, you would think the investigator, but that's not what the sentence says. The modifier needs to stand next to the word that it modifies. Using the procedure stands next to what? The participants. So this sentence means that the participants were using the procedure, and that could be because we don't know the context. But actually, APA considers this sentence incorrect because it is unclear about whether the investigator or the participants used the procedure. APA actually says it's incorrect. It's not really grammatically incorrect because grammatically we understand, or we should understand, that the participants were using the procedure. But to make that clear, APA recommends this. The next sentence. The investigator tested the participants who were using this procedure. The clicker stopped working. Can we click on the next, the down arrow on the computer? The clicker doesn't work for some reason. Right. Okay. Or, so Steve says it should be the investigator. So what do? We put the modifier next to the investigator. So using this procedure, the investigator tested the participants. Okay, so do we have an idea what modifiers are? Okay. So can you click on the yellow area, that little text box? Just click on it. So that is an example of a misplaced modifier, and I got that from that Duke website that I told you about. Take a moment to read it. What is supposed to be quick frozen and stored at -70? The tissues? And what does the sentence say? What does the sentence say? Who was quick frozen? William Chick, the investigator. Okay? So modifier errors can be quite hilarious, actually. Okay? But they shouldn't happen, right? Because obviously it shouldn't be the investigator that was quick frozen. So you can close out this example. Thank you. Okay. Now, and so if this is not clear, you want to find more, then when you dust off your Bedford Handbook, you can look for the modifiers chapter in it. Okay? Now, I think that's chapter 8. In chapter 9, in your handbook, you'll find a little bit of information about parallel structure. Who has heard that one before? Parallelism. So here's another little error that can make your writing convoluted, but you want to make sure that you keep your sentences parallel. What does it mean? It means that everything that has the same grammatical role in a sentence, they need to be in the same format. So for example, look at that long sentence over there. I know you love this section, right? Participants were told to study each picture, to turn the page when the bell rang, and that they should ask about anything unclear in the instructions. Again, apologies about the social science example. What's wrong with that sentence? It's not parallel. It says it right there. The answer is it's not parallel, right? Why? Because they were told to do 3 things. What were the 3 things? To study each picture, to turn the page, and to ask if they have questions. So words and expressions that have the same function in the sentence, so in this case they were told to do 3 things, then you need to have the same format. And then finally, the last one should be something that you're aware of, because in your English classes, you heard a lot about subject-verb agreement, right? Your subjects and your verbs should agree. But really, I wanted to highlight that error because that is something that's fairly easy to notice, and it's very annoying when you don't do it, right? It makes your writing really, really unprofessional. So subject-verb agreement, meaning that should happen, so I put there subject-verb disagreement because that's the error, when they don't agree. So look at the 2 examples. You see that the percentage of correct responses as well as the speed of the responses increases. Why is that? Actually, that would be an incorrect answer. So somebody said that the speed of the responses, that is not the subject here. Look at this, as well as. You see as well as? That is a prepositional phrase, so we disregard that, as well as the speed of the responses. Anything that stands in a prepositional phrase cannot be the subject. So the subject is the percentage. Okay? So the percentage, that's singular, the percentage increases. Okay, so if you need a review of that, where do you go? Your little Bedford Handbook, chapter 21. I'm assuming that you all have it, but if you don't have it, this is really modifiers, parallelism, subject-verb agreement are things that you can really truly Google and find information about, okay? Okay. Here's my next tip regarding maintaining clarity. Obviously, if your writing is ambiguous, then you're not being clear, right? So here is where sometimes we're going to go into areas where social scientists and natural scientists sometimes disagree. But we're going to make it happen today, right? So here's the thing. Using the third person, what do we mean by that? What's the third person? The third person means he or she, or in plural, they. They, right? So he, she, or they. So in the olden days, in the golden days, if you and you co-wrote a paper and you talked about what you did, you say the authors reviewed the literature. You're talking about yourselves, right? But you will say the authors reviewed the literature. And you did that because the rules in the old days said, do not use a personal pronoun, do not use I, or do not use we. So the rules are changing a little bit. In the interest of clarity, to be more clear, it is acceptable to say we reviewed the literature. Okay? So in most cases, if not all journals will agree that that is okay, right? Because that's what we did. So as long as you're talking about what you did, I did this, that will be fine. So APA actually prefers straight up that you use that. However, while we're talking about we, don't use the editorial we. And by editorial we mean using we as general subject, like we humans, right? We people, right? When you talk about we, make sure you talk about you and another person. So that's the only time you can use we. Otherwise, you say people, humans, whatever the reason it is that you use it as a general subject, do not use it as a general subject. That is clear? Yes, ma'am. Okay, so we... And in the 1970s, he didn't want to retype it. So I don't know if Kendall heard that, but so Dr. Morgan was talking about the dangers of using we. We is you and another person. If you're doing something on your own, then it's I. Okay? I is good, as long as you're talking about what you did. And finally, the most controversial things of all, active voice versus passive voice. Okay, so here we have a little problem. Social scientists, APA style, put it in writing. You try not to use passive voice at all. We prefer active voice. Okay, what does that mean? Look at the two examples, please. The first one is passive. The survey was conducted in a controlled setting. And the second one is active. We conducted the survey in a controlled setting. Which one do you guys like? You like the first one? Yes, I get that. I ask that question a lot. I ask when I teach active and passive in my classes. People tend to prefer the passive voice, the first one, because it sounds more academic, right? Now, if you are a social scientist, then the journals will send it back and say, who conducted the survey? So if you know who conducted the survey, then you need to use active voice. We conducted the we as in the authors, right? Now, I have a little test for you. In your handouts or up on the screen, I have 2 sentences here. 2 sentences in group A and 2 sentences in group B. So which sentence is better? Which one sounds more academic to you? So group A and group B. I'm going to put it back a little bit. It's cut off at an unfortunate point there, but it's on your handouts. Okay, just a few more seconds. And while you're thinking, I'll talk to you about the great, what did I say? The great active and passive voice debate. I made that up. There is no great debate. But there's a discussion. Okay? Now, so Dr. Pulido directed your attention to ACS, and he did that to me too when we had our meeting. So being a good student, I do my homework. So I went to the ACS website. And I found that, like Dr. Pulido said, they have lots of resources. They have the editorial service. They also have webinars that you can listen to if you are a member. And guess what? One of the webinars was on active versus passive voice. So I was fascinated. Now, I'm not a member of ACS. That might change. I might have to get my membership in there. But on the webinar description, in the description, they directed me to this Reddit page that is done by the authors. So this is what they say. I'm just going to read those few sentences that I highlighted there. The authors of this webinar through ACS, who are, one of them is a writing instructor in physics at the University of Illinois, and the other one is an associate professor with health research and policy at Stanford. So this is what they say. Other than the use of commas, the most viciously fought over mark of punctuation among editors, nothing inflames technical writers' passions more than the passive versus active voice. I'm very passionate about that. Also, while the use of the third-person passive voice was once mandatory for scientific articles, first-person active voice is increasingly common. Notice they don't say it's preferred, because they're not like APA style. They can't say that because they would hurt a lot of scientists' feelings, right? But it's increasingly common. Celia, who is old and old school, it says it here, I didn't make it up. Celia, who's old and old school, is a strong proponent of the passive voice, arguing that it puts the emphasis, properly in her opinion, on what was found, not who did the finding. So that's why you would use passive voice, because in passive voice you start the sentence with what we found, or what we did. The survey was conducted, right? Kristen objects to the passive voice because its use obscures who is responsible for what, right? So in active voice, we start with who did what. Whether you prefer the forceful, direct style of the active voice or the neutral, objective tone of the passive voice, we think you'll find that each has its uses in the writer's arsenal. Okay? So my point here is that we no longer have to write that way. The survey was conducted, right? Most likely you're going to be okay to say we conducted the survey, or whatever is the equivalent in your writing. Now, so being a good student, I looked up the ACS style guide, and this is what the style guide said. Both the passive voice and active voice are acceptable. Specific examples for when to use each. They include specific examples in the style guide. And that's where my little test comes from, and if you're wondering, I'm going to share the answers in a second. And then there's a brand new since 2014, edition of the Council of Science Editors style guide. That style guide actually advocates for the active voice. So you see a trend coming for the active voice. So here you go. According to the ACS, the American Chemist Society, right? I forgot it for a second. So the ACS style guide says, in group A, we prefer the passive. Okay? So in group A, the correct answer is number 2. Use the passive voice when the doer of the action is unknown or not important, or when you prefer not to specify the doer of the action. That, by the way, is not a chemical explanation. That's the definition of passive voice from any grammar handbook. And group B, the correct answer is A. The correct answer is 1, according to the ACS style guide. Use the active voice when it is less wordy and more direct than the passive. There's a chapter in your Bedford handbook on using the active voice also. And also definitely something that you want to Google. You can definitely Google it. There's plenty of information out there. If this is something that sounded completely unfamiliar. And then last thing, we said your writing should be clear and concise, right? Clear, so I finished clarity, and just a few tips on how to be more concise, meaning brief, right? So don't be wordy and don't be redundant. Okay? So a few examples of wordiness. How many of you like to say things like, based on the fact that? You love it? Forget it. Based on the fact that is because. Yes, concise means short. You want to be short. You want to be direct, straightforward, short. You guys, listen, you no longer are concerned with word count. That was in English class when your professor said 900 words and you had to fill the page. And I would still mark you wordy for that. But the point is, you need to keep it short. This time around, the shorter your paper, the better, right, Dr. Pulido? Dr. Pulido goes like this. Absolutely. Especially when your professors have to read it. Okay. How many of you say things like, in spite of the fact that? I've seen it. Come on. Although. Yeah? Okay, and the last one. Look at that one. It is important to note that. What's the replacement to that? Nothing. Just note it. Just say it, okay? So forget it. Forget it. And then redundancy is saying things like, the reason for this is because. How many of you has written that? The reason for this is because. I don't even like to say that out loud. The reason and because are redundant. You're saying the same thing. So the reason for this is that, or just use because. One or the other, right? 4 different groups are 4 groups. Something is essential. If it's essential, we know what that word means. There shouldn't be absolutely essential, right? And a summary is a brief summary. Just like a gift is a free gift is a gift, right? Okay, so you can look up wordiness and redundancy in your handbook. Oh, going the wrong way. It's chapter 16. Again, I'm assuming it's on your bookshelf. By the way, if it's not on your bookshelf, but now you really like to look at the handbook because I said it so many times, then you go to the library. Every library has one on the reference shelf. And then the last thing, again, I swear we didn't talk in that much detail, but remember Dr. Purito's last slide was do your due diligence, right? That's exactly my last message, my last tip for you. Be diligent. And I think I mean exactly the same thing that he meant, right? I'm going to give you a moment to enjoy the cartoon there. So read, reread, have somebody else read. That's very important because somebody else will catch something that you think is not there but is there. Proofread. Proofreading means reading for grammatical errors. Be consistent, word of the day, right? And what does that really mean is remember the research question, right? Because in the end, did you or did you not answer the research question? Okay, so can we can we click on those cards? Click on that word. So you, just to summarize, you're resourceful, you're accurate, and you're diligent. Those were my 3 tips to write: resourceful, accurate, and diligent. Okay, one more click, and that's it. So don't worry about these. I'm looking at Teresa and Dr. Margolin. These are reflection questions for students who need it. I don't know who needs it, who doesn't. But just to wrap up, what I want to do is do a quick game. Can we start the Kahoot? Find yourself a partner, and I'm hoping that Kendall Campus is still with us. Go ahead and find yourself a partner because I'm going to check to see if you paid attention with this brief game. Okay. I can actually, I'll go in the back for about 1 minute. In that 1 minute, what I'd like for you to do is find yourself a partner. Maybe we can do 3 people if you're odd. If you're an odd number, and pick your team a name, and I'll be right back. Okay, we're waiting for the Kendall Campus. Is that Kendall Campus? No? No. Okay, if Kendall Campus is still with us, then make sure it's clear that you are a Kendall. You can make that part of the team name. Steve, what's the name of your group? We have 7 teams. Are you guys one? Well, we have 7 teams here. I don't know if Kendall is joining us. They went to sleep. Oh, 8. Is BB from Kendall? Nope. Okay. We can start, Ray. Okay, there's gonna be one question at the beginning to test. What is the date today? This is not an actual question. It's just to test to see if it works. Okay, we have 9 seconds. Okay, everybody got it right. Good, so it works. Next, Ray. Next, please. Yes, next. Research questions should be focused, challenging, and ha, I got you, all of you. Okay, while the word of the day was consistency, we said research questions need to be focused, challenging, and grounded, right? We don't want to be speculative. We want to be grounded. And I know I didn't discuss that in the interest of time because you already had yours. But those are the 3 criteria, and it's in your notes. Let's go. The abstract contains a summary of 10 seconds. Okay, very good. Yes, the purpose, the methods, finding, and those are the essential parts of your abstract. A summary of each of those. Okay, next. Casey is in the lead. Okay, next. Okay, so true or false, the pronoun I should never be used in research papers. Uh-oh. You can see the correct answer as a check mark. So it's so I just said, right, it's okay to use I did this as long as you're talking about what you don't want to talk about your feelings, but what you did during the study is active voice. Cool nerds are reading the game. All right. After reviewing the literature, research methods were selected. So is this sentence grammatically correct or incorrect? Okay, before we go from here, who selected the research methods? Who reviewed the literature? The research methods? Did the research methods review the literature? Then it's incorrect, right? Because reviewing the literature is your modifier. It's a dangling modifier, right? Not the research methods. They didn't review anything. It was the researcher. Okay, cool nerds are leading. Okay, one more grammar question for you. Each of these studies is well known. So I'm going to help you. This time is subject-verb agreement. Correct or incorrect? Okay, so in this case, each is your subject, and each is always singular. So each is. Okay, Ocean team takes the lead. Okay, next, full citations are listed. Okay, so obviously we have some people in the room who once upon a time had an English class where they used MLA style, Model Language Association. But the problem is that MLA style, we say works, cited, not works cited. Ocean team is in the lead. Next. Proofreading your paper is absolutely essential. This sentence is redundant, concise, active, or not parallel. Okay. The little student in the back, he wins. Yes, next. Next, please. Okay. This is not included in the results section. What is it that you don't include in the results section? Look at your notes. This is very important. What's not included in the results section? Interpretation of data is the correct answer. It's very important. In results, you don't interpret, you just list the results. You interpret in discussions. Okay. 2 more questions. This one is an optional section in the manuscript. Is it the abstract, the literature review, an introduction, or the appendices? Which we know is the plural of appendix. Okay, look at the sentence. It's an optional section. So those of you who selected introduction, what I said was there's always an introduction. It's just sometimes you don't have that title. Okay. Next. What's the word of the day? Consistent. Your paper is consistent with your research question. Okay, cool nerds win. Where are the cool nerds? Yay. The moral of the story is that the students who sit in the front win. Okay, thank you. So this concludes the presentation. Both Dr. Pulido and I are here if you have questions and you like us to answer some things for you. Thank you for coming.